at UCSC. It's a part of the Basic Needs program. And we're really fortunate to be able to work. What, Tim?
Coffee is a basic need.
Yeah, well, we also do a lot more than coffee. We do a lot of farm processing, but historically we have to call ourselves a coffee shop due to the way that the university works. But we've been processing a lot of apples and produce, and we do pantry distributions to students that are food insecure, as well as a lot of culinary education. So this week we distributed cider donut kits. I recognize some people's names here that received donut kits. And that juice was pressed by one of our panelists here, Nicole, and was picked by two of our panelists here, Sky and Orin, as well as a number of other contributors at the farm. So we really brought everyone together here to just talk about apples because it's apple season and it's appropriate. So I want to read the bios for our four panelists who we're very grateful to have here, starting off with Sky. So Sky DeMuro is the flower and orchard production manager at the UCSC farm. Born and raised in the northeastern US, Sky's been living and farming in California for the past 12 years. She's worked on community farms in Massachusetts and California since 2006, and is specializing in fruit trees since 2011. Sky is committed to building community, joy, and healing through land stewardship, food, and art. She's a single mother by choice of an awesome 4-year-old. She loves the ocean, and her secret wish is to have a donkey rescue farm. And then we've got chuckling away is Tim Bates, who is also my uncle and who taught me a lot about apples. Tim has been growing organic apples and pears and quince and other stuff since 1985. A degree in English literature naturally led to organic farming, organic gardening, and then farming. Tim learned farming from the tractor seat. Science is not his strong suit, but he's finally starting to catch on. Been also making hard cider since probably 1986, currently planting more cider varieties, many classic cider apples not faring well in NorCal. Been making compost on farm for decades. Orin Martin, apprentice UCSC Farm and Garden 1974 to 75. It was a year-long program back then. Ran SC County City Community Gardens program from 75 to 77. Hired as a manager for Chadwick Garden in 77. The rest is, as they say, history. Has been involved with growing fruit trees and teaching various audiences how to grow fruit trees at both the farm and garden since 1977 as an apprentice program instructor. He's also an author of the Rose Primer, Selecting and Growing Roses Organically and Fruit Trees for Every Garden. Lastly, we have Nicole. And Nicole is a local of the Santa Cruz community and has, when did you start? Maybe I'll let you do a little bio introduction since we brought you on, but runs Santa Cruz Cider. And like I said, pressed the cider for the apples and has been very involved in the orchard and apple scene for a long time here in Santa Cruz and Watsonville. So I'll let you introduce yourself there, Nicole.
Thanks, Brooks. Yeah, I've been fermenting things for about 15 years, started with wine, moved into beer, and eventually cider found me. We were looking at a property for sale in Watsonville, and it had 2 acres of apples, and we didn't know much about apples, and there was nobody living there. So we went back at night and filled up our truck bed and took the apples away and made cider, and folks really liked what we made. So we kept doing it. And what really got the Santa Cruz Cider Company its start was our friend Dave bought that same piece of property. And so we had already made cider from it, 1 year. And so then going back and being able to get to know the apples. So honestly, when I started making cider, this was probably 2010, I was using red ones and green ones. I didn't know the difference in all the different apple varieties. So us having, full access to that property and getting to know them, we actually learned that it's one of the old teaching orchards of Watsonville. So junior high and high school students used to go there after school, and the teachers would show them about how to graft and prune and identify varieties and stuff like that. So since I've become more ingrained in the apple scene here, we have many friends that are, 5th generation farmers that, oh yeah, my dad remembers going to that place in high school and this and that. And so it's been really cool just getting to know all the local growers, the different nuances there, the huge families that don't get along. It's been really, really interesting. So yeah, we work with about 7 local farms to make Santa Cruz cider, and we have a medium to small size press where we can press for other folks and do that too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And the juice is delicious, so we really appreciate that. So we're just going to keep a really loose form on here. We've got like 4 people who work all around apples. And so what I'm going to ask people to do is stay muted when you're not talking. Panelists, you can keep unmuted the whole time. That's okay. But for everyone who's participating, just stay muted. And then if you look on your screen, there's a participants button at the bottom, and there's a little arrow. And if you press it, you can raise your hand. And we can call on you to ask a question. Also, if you don't feel like saying your question out loud, you can type it into the chat and we will read it. And then I just want the panelists to be able to bounce off each other, talk about similarities and differences, and you can ask any question you have about apples. And there's no question too easy, or there might be a question that's too hard. I don't know. We'll see. This is a pretty expert panel as well. So would anyone like to kick us off? All right, I've got one as a primer. Oh, here we got Leslie Wade. So, greetings from the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Georgia. I'm a California native and Dad lives in Scott Valley near UCSC. I'm now growing heirloom apples in North Georgia, including cider apples. Well, that's great. As a question, I'm just gonna go off with what is your favorite varietal of apple and why? And maybe kick it off with Sky.
Tough question, but I had an idea it might be coming. So I can't name just one, but I love this heirloom apple called the Holstein that Orin, my mentor, introduced me to. And I'm also a big fan of the Freiburg, which I also was introduced to up in the Chadwick Garden. But mostly I love apples, but my favorite thing about apples, honestly, is pruning them. I mean, I like eating them, but I love pruning them most of all.
Orin, you want to go next?
Well, that's a rough question for anybody involved with apples. Really couldn't cut it down to less than 25 or 30. Often we'll quip last one I ate. But since Sky was drifting in the direction she was, I would say right now, my favorite apple is Alcamini. Oh, look. I've got one. And it's a derivative of Cox's Orange Pippin. Oh, I've got one of those too. The 2 she mentioned, Holstein and Freiburg, are also Cox's Orange Pippins. So why? My wife says I like to bring out my Irish heritage, and I only do stuff that's tough, hard. Cox's Orange Pippin and its derivatives. We could take the whole time of the panel up telling you everything that can go wrong with it. It's not a grower-friendly apple, nor are there its offspring. It's about everything that can go wrong with an apple can go wrong with it. And yet, when you've got it in hand to mouth, cool kind of subsistence agriculture, the taste is sublime. It's sprightly. It's got plenty of juice, but it actually is a little dry at the same time, as odd as that may sound. And you get these kind of aromatics, certainly a little bit of nuttiness, maybe towards hazelnuts like that. And the Freiburg that Sky mentioned is almost, it's so aromatic, it almost drifts off towards subtropicality. You get a little lemon, a little guava, a little this, a little that. So I'm a big fan of the Cox's Orange Pippin tribe.
Nice. That's
Oh,
awesome.
but also, how about Mutsu? Mutsu, I'll go a little bit more and I'll shut up. Mutsu, we were the first folks to planted it in 72. Nobody knew what it was. It's Japanese apple. Has some golden delicious in its parentage. And the Japanese, unlike the Americans, are not hung up on apples having to be red. In fact, Mutsu and its offspring, there's a variety called Sayaka, Suguru, Kinsai, and one that has nothing to do with me called Orin, are big and green, and they're both sweet with some good balancing acidity, and they're kind of an all-purpose apple. You can eat them fresh out of hand. You can make sweet cider out of them, and you can bake with them.
And they're pickers' favorite apples to pick because they're big and easy to get to.
Yeah, and Nicole
This
pressed.
is a mid-sized one. We've actually had 1 pounders, and the taste is not diluted by size.
And Nicole, you pressed a large amount of those Mutsus from the farm in Chadwick. So do you want to speak to your favorite varietal? No, it's a nice.
Yeah, I think the Newtown Pippin, it does something special in our county here. I've had other Newtowns from all over California and even some from back east. And what Newtown does in the Pajaro Valley is something very special. It's a good eating apple. It stores well. It presses easy. And it makes amazing single varietal cider as well as a blender. So all around, that's my kind of go-to.
Awesome. And lastly, Tim, you know, I know it changes probably every season a little bit, but what's
Well, we have a heck of a time growing Newtown Pippins up here. I just gave up. I had 5 trees and they grow great, but I never get hardly any fruit. So, and my neighbor, we're just talking a quarter of a mile away, had great Newtown Pippins. So I wish I could figure that one out. But we're talking about favorite this week. King David, Wixon, and actually Stamen wine saps are superbly flavored this week. And well, Spitzenberg always is on the top of the list at this time of year. Earlier on, Kerry Irish Pippin and Connell Red for eating out of hand. Cider-wise, Spitzenberg and Wixon tend to be at the top of the heap almost every year, and along with King David. And I have a lot of King Davids, and it turns out apples I don't like too much are Arkansas Black and or Black Twig, but they seem to make a really good cider. And I wouldn't have thought that until we made it. So anyway,
isn't the King Black, isn't some of the parentage from Arkansas Black? I believe, isn't it a hybrid between an Arkansas? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's up to debate. I would say that could quite likely be true because it's fairly small. Arkansas Black, and was it Jonathan? Now I need to remember. Come on, Orin, tell me.
That's what you wrote down. I've got it in my notes. I pulled out my notes.
David probably know too. I can't remember what they said, but it kind of fit whatever it was. It's a smaller apple, kind of like its other one. But you know, Arkansas Black can be nice and big. And my Northern Spies this year are huge. I don't know why. If I could figure it out, I would grow them actually a little smaller. But
awesome. Well, those were all great examples of. There's a whole bunch of varieties. I know up in Chadwick we've got like 160 somewhere in there. Tim's nearing 100 at the Philo Apple Farm. We have quite a few down at the farm, so it's one of the great wonders of the apple world is the extreme diversity of varietals. I'm going to go up to Adria Vidalas asked, hi y'all, does anyone have any experience with agroforestry? And if so, is it possible to do with apple trees?
wow.
Doozy.
I would say a little bit leaning towards Michael Phillips and is trying to recreate the forest ecology in your orchard using like wood chips and stuff to stimulate the Michael Reisel thing. And we've done a fair amount of it, but I can't say that I can see direct results after 3 or 4 years of doing that, other than it feels good. So how we're actually doing under the soil and improvement and stuff, I don't know. And I have to say also climate change is doing some very strange things out here in the orchard. So a lot of things are not doing as well as they used to, and some like it.
Orin?
So Tim, when you say doing a Michael Phillips thing, you mean using wood chips?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got access to lots. I have like, I don't even show you the picture of the pile.
Maybe I could add on to that if that's okay, Brooks.
Of course.
Don't want to sound like too much like an evangelist or a snake oil salesman, but I've been using wood chips, now called more formally ramial wood chips, for 35, 40 years. Now, in truth, they're not the ramial wood chips that Michael Phillips and others talk about. That's from hardwood trees, which you have back east. Out here, we've got mostly conifers and that dreaded friend from down under, the eucalyptus. And so we use the Campus Tree Cruz chips, which are, again, conifers and ukes. And we put on 3 or 4 inches under the trees in both spring and fall. In the fall, again, this is on a garden scale, very big planting and intensive trees. We lay down the chips in the fall, we sow our cover crop into it, just rake it in, grow it. Cover crop comes up, grows. When it gets hip to chest high in the spring, we drop and chop. We come with a machete sharp and drop it on the ground. Sometimes we chop it a little bit and then chip over again like that. And I started doing this, and all the admonitions are don't use conifers, don't use eucalyptus, they have tannins and whatnot. But I'm here to say the effect on the soil is phenomenal. The wood chips are really good at suppressing weeds. Let me just qualify that by saying annual weeds, not so much perennial weeds. And they actually break down, once you get going, you get your system going in a couple, 3 years, they actually break down much quicker than you think they would. They are just about pure carbon. They probably are a 400 to 500 to 1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. Straw, which is pretty carbonaceous, is only 40 to 50 to 1. But they break down relatively quickly after a few years. Of course, leach their nutrients down into the soil, and their effect on the soil, the physical effect on the soil is phenomenal. The soil is, well, not a technical term, but light and fluffy. It's dank, dope, like that. And they really ramp up soil biology. So again, we're able to get access to chips from the campus, and we're able to work on a garden scale and do this quite well. So in a sense, our garden orchard becomes a no-till system.
Awesome. Sky, do you have anything to add to that down at the basic campus?
I would just say that, agroforestry, as far as a concept of diversifying any agricultural system with trees, apple trees make awesome addition to a farm or garden. And we, see lots of benefits including being habitat for birds, which are sometimes great predators to some pesky pests, and offer other great opportunities under and around the orchards for increasing biodiversity with different species of grasses, flowers, perennials, etc.
Awesome. While we're on this general area of permaculture, agroforestry, land stewardship, I want to read Julia Davenport's question. She says, I didn't dormant spray this year, but had fewer worms than ever. Should I continue not to spray? And I know I have a feeling that these folks might ask what you were spraying in the past. Or if you're referring to copper or compost tea, or what exactly you were spraying in the past, I think would probably help with clarification. But does anyone want to start speaking to that?
I kind of missed the first part. She used dormant oil and had less worms than ever. Was that?
She did not.
I did not use. I normally do, and I did not.
Oh, hi. Wow. I dropped dormant oil, I don't know, 30 years ago, probably 25 years ago. I didn't see that it was benefiting any way that I could tell, especially in terms of codling moth. So assume that's the guy you're talking about.
One point is I found this to be a somewhat or even very low calling moth summer and very year to year. Warm summers usually have higher pressure. Although we had a few wicked heat waves, it was overall, we had August and we had July, which is worse than August. So maybe it was, we had less pressure, maybe because of the cooler weather. Calling moth is tough. There are pheromone dispensers you can use, and that works fairly well to really well on, let me qualify a little bit, 5 acres plus, flat ground and a uniform canopy. We have the complete opposite of that. Steep slope, mixed canopy, and just kind of what would be called edge effects, little pockets of trees here and there. But for quite a few years, I used the pheromone dispensers and found it to be effective, although conventional wisdom says not. Scott, you want to tell them a little bit about program at the farm?
Yeah, sure. We likewise do use the pheromone dispensers we source them from Alpha Sense. And like Orin said, the directions are going to be for, one every acre or something crazy like that. But if you have a small amount, we just kind of go for it, go big, and put about one per tree up high in the tree. And in some years, usually I honestly don't get to it, but doing some monitoring, so getting the sticky traps and seeing, who's flying when, and really keeping track of temperatures in the spring will help you sort of nail that point, because it has to happen along with mating time. But there's a lot of great information online more about codling moths. And then as far as sprays, this past year didn't get to much of anything because I feel like it's still February, but it's also December somehow, and we're somewhere in the middle. But dormant oil we have used for aphids. We have pretty bad aphids, and there's no magic remedy, but have done some dormant oil. Neem, although neem is real annoying as far as
really stinks and it clogs up the sprayer.
I learned to embrace it eventually.
Yeah, Tim, you have an awesome spray situation and compost tea. I don't know if you remember, I stopped by and hunted you down at your compost tea brewer like 3 or 4 years ago and just kept pestering you with questions. But I was really impressed with your holistic sprays. I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
Oh dear. Well, we're still using compost tea, and I have to say, on our scale of 15 acres, the neem was just too expensive in the long run, and I could get as good of effects with a lot less expensive stuff that's all organic and this and that. I can't even remember all the things I'm using now. Using an advisor. Yeah, it was great fun doing all that stuff, but at some point it was just financially not going to keep happening. So on a smaller scale, I would still say stick with that program if it's working. And it didn't say, I'm not saying it didn't work, but it was like, wow, we're running out of time here, and I'll have to throw in real quick. The labor shortage is just being now devastating. I only got one guy picking all the time, and I need 2.5 guys to keep up and keep it right, and it's not there. So we're slipping a little bit in culture, and the thinning is a big thing here at my farm. But back to the worm, I've been using the puffer pheromones because I have 15 acres, and of course, as Orin was pointing out, I got hills, I got everything, and they kept telling me it wouldn't work. But amigo Bob told me stick with it. So I've been doing really well for 25 years. And I also release trichogramma, about 1 million of them every 2 weeks to supplement it. I've been doing quite well. However, this year is one of the worst codling moth years I've seen in a long time. But I think there's so many other things that could be coming into play. But I'm still a pretty big champion of pheromones.
Awesome. And have you been sending in your compost tea for active fungal counts, Tim? I remember when I was there,
no, I've been using a compost tea charges it up and make sure it comes out right. My consultant is not a big believer in trying to get those high fungal counts. He just said you're still not going to get the results with the compost tea that they were talking about up north.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense because those fungal populations really only are active above 75 to 85 degrees, which you're not going to hold in an orchard in Northern California. So I was always kind of suspect of that.
Yeah, who wants to go apply anything on at that time of day? 5 degrees.
Too hot to drive the tractor. Well, pivoting to the opposite end of the season and a little more of the eating and juicing of apples, we have 2 questions I want to pivot to Nicole over here. We've got one specifically asking if you differentiate between Newtown and Yellow Pippin, and if you have any tips for making cider at home.
Well, I thought it was the yellow Newtown Pippin.
Yeah,
Yeah, I thought they were one and the same.
they are, and there's Albemarle Pippin is the same thing. The county of Albemarle in Virginia claims it as its own. It's actually from the 1700s from Newtown, Long Island.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's cleared up, and we have a quorum on that. So moving on, do you have any tips for making cider at home?
Yeah, mostly what I put in the notes there, you want to make sure you have your equipment, so a bucket or a carboy or something that you can also put an airlock on. So as you have fermentable sugars in the apple juice, and any yeast that you give it is going to eat those sugars and create alcohol and CO2. And you want the CO2 to be able to off-gas somewhere. So that airlock is a key piece in home cider making and brewing. So make sure you have one of those. Keep your equipment clean. There's multiple products out there for that. And then fresh pressed unpasteurized juice is the best way to go. There's a couple spots around here that sell it, like Gizditch and Everett Family Farm. You can go and just buy it right from the juicer. That's the best way. Temperature, you want to ideally, it depends on what yeast you used. I do recommend pitching a yeast, because then you know your product is going to turn out good. If you go for a wild yeast, I haven't had the best luck with wild yeast. There is another local cider maker, Tanuki, and he does everything wild and has great success. And so I tried it this year. I'm like, I'm going wild. You know, Tanuki can do it, I can do it. And it turned out like nail polish. So yeah, so I recommend pitching a yeast. You can get it from any, homebrew forum online, store online. And then low and slow fermentation. Most fermentation is probably going to be around 60 degrees. So find that spot in your house, whether it's a cupboard or a garage or something, to let it ferment. Let it ferment to dry, and then you ideally want to rack it into a secondary fermenter where you'll let it age. But you also want to make sure that secondary fermenter is completely topped off with no oxygen. And that's one of the most important things. You don't want any oxygen to get to that cider before you bottle it. And then multiple options for bottling and kegging. I won't get into that, gets into a whole nother conversation that you can go on for hours about. But you do want to make sure that when you do bottle it, you don't have too much sugar in there, because once you put that cap on it, if you have too much sugar, your bottles will explode. And it always happens at 2 a.m. It's never going to happen, in the afternoon when you're working on a project. It's 2 a.m. It's going to explode, wake you up.
It's like a rule of physics. It's like,
yeah, it is. So yeah, we've all done it as home fermenters, but those are kind of like the main tips.
Yeah, and then on the pressing front too, you can go and source juice, but if you do want to press at home, there are companies that will rent you out a small home press. Seven Bridges in Santa Cruz used to rent them, but you can find usually people who will rent you or lend you
Mountain Feed and Seed rents them out.
There it is. There it is. Yeah, I used to work at Seven Bridges, so I was used to get it from there. But yeah, you can rent out a press, and it's really fun. And the basic concept is that you're grinding up the apples into a pumice. Not too mushy. You're not making an applesauce. You need a little bit of solid to create a filter bed for things to go through. And then there's a lot of different types of press. The most common type is a screw cap, which just uses pressure to displace the juice. It goes inside of a cloth bag. The cloth acts as a filter in addition to the media of the pulped apple. And then the juice comes out through the cloth, which offers an additional layer of filtration. I know Nicole and Tim both have rack and cloth hydraulic presses, which use cloth with a pump, folding the pumice and folding it over and using plastic racks in between, and then the hydraulics squeeze it and press the juice out. But there's also bladder presses, which will use an internal membrane that fills up with water or air and pushes it out through the edge. And there's a couple other nifty types of presses, accordion presses, and a few others. But the art of kind of pulling the juice out of the apple is very fun. this time of year. And thank you, Orin, for adding the Mountain Farm and Feed. That's a good one, and they're a great company, great resource. We've got a question from Leslie Wade here. So Tim said he gave up dormant oil 30 years ago. What does he use now for dormant season sprays? Something similar to Michael Phillips' approach?
Not in the last couple of years. We're just happy to not be doing too much except pruning. So no pre-bloom practices. We come into play with a series of booster sprays through August York, and those aren't until, can't remember, not till bloom, till post. Is there one before bloom? Jersey's over there. Yeah. Yeah, there's one before bloom, and then after bloom, a series of sprays with Compost Tea as the basic unit sprays. And we're fertigating now too for the first time ever for the last 2 years, and I'm quite happy with that.
Awesome. Orin, do you want to speak to what you do at Chadwick during the dormant season?
I take long walks in the woods. But when I'm not goofing off, let's see, pretty religiously for 30 years or so, we would spray delayed dormant sulfur. Lately, last 4 or 5 years, I've switched to copper. Copper and sulfur are your certified organic fungicide products. And I use copper now for several reasons. It's a little more effective on disease organisms. It doesn't stink to high heaven like sulfur does. And it comes in a liquid form, so it's easier to mix into the tank. Copper comes generally in a powder form. You have to make a little paste and then get it to mix with the water in the tank. Could usually get by with one, maybe two delayed dormant sprays with sulfur or copper. And then we would use dormant oil. Dormant oil is your insecticide of choice in the organic world. There's so many variables, I don't know, but those sprays seem to be fairly effective in all but the most wicked wet El Nino type winters. We also have what does they say in the real estate business? Location, location, location. We're right on the edge of a chaparral and a mixed coniferous forest. So we have a lot of birds that exert pretty good pressure. Insectivorous birds that are really good at dealing with pests, particularly aphids. One of my favorite sights is an early morning stroll around the trees in the garden in late winter, early spring, and you see this undulating flock of bush tits, these really gregarious birds that are just flocking to every little nook and cranny on the branches. They're branch gleaners, and they're just going after the eggs of the aphids, and they prove to be fairly effective. I was just reading a study out of UC Davis, I believe, talking about using, or again, if you are proximal to a riparian or a woodland area, you will have these bird species, but they're finding pretty effective control of codling moth from nuthatches, flickers, and those are two way different birds in terms of their size and their behaviors, and a lot of different wrens. But I have to say, I'm getting older and not as spry. And I haven't been spraying that much the last 2 or 3 years, and or maybe 3 or 4 years. And during that time period, we've had extremely wet winters and extremely dry winters. And maybe we've just pushed the base population of fungal diseases and pests down, but we haven't been having much of a problem. But I think you're going to find that so much of fruit tree growing is about what happens in 2 or 3 weeks in the spring when the trees are in bloom. If the sun shines, there's not too much wind, pollen's viable, bees fly, pollination happens, fruit set's good, and your incidence of disease is relatively low. And to the degree that's not true, it's not a good year.
Yeah, lovely, lovely time of year, scab season. Which I had some questions about that for all of you. I don't know, but first I want to give Sky a chance to talk about dormant season and whether you're applying any oils. I think maybe we were circling back. You did speak to that a little earlier.
Yeah. I didn't this past year, but the previous 2 winters used a dormant oil spray. Tried to get one, I think 2 winters ago, I only got one on late. And the year before that, there were, I think, at least 2 sprays. And you do have to time all of these products with rain, depending on what you're spraying.
Great. So I just wanted to ask all of you about that wonderful time of year, scab season. And I think this is something that, as professional orchardists, it's really difficult anyway. But if you're an amateur and you have a couple of trees in your backyard, can you walk through like what you should be looking for in that springtime when buds start to break, what you should be watching out for, and what you can do to kind of protect your fruit in the springtime, looking towards the fall? And I'll let Nicole, I don't know if you do much fungal control or if you want to talk about that.
Not much. Our approach at our farm is just kind of hands off. We don't do a whole lot. So I think moving forward we will, but I don't have as much experience as other folks on the panel.
Well, then I'll let Tim dive in on that wonderful time of year, scab season. And
my favorite time of the year. Not. I still use lime sulfur and powdered sulfur, and use that in a combination, the Michael Phillips and the neem and well-timed neems, and we did our best, but we did not get control of scab as much as I'd like. Of course, do you ever have as much control as you like? And I sort of reversed and went back to lime sulfur for the first couple of sprays. And you got to be careful with lime sulfur. It's going to start to burn things. And I like what Orin was saying about copper. We kind of gave up copper because I killed a couple of sheep who wandered into the orchard and ate the grass. And we sent their liver into the UC Davis, and it was copper poisoning. So I agree. Copper is marvel. I still occasionally use it on peaches because for peach leaf curl, it's about the only cure. So I'm back on sulfur and lime sulfur and trying to ease it down every time. And I just have to say, at my scale of farm, Compost Tea and neem did not control scab as much as I dreamed it would. We did our best. 3 years of intense doing that, to be honest.
And Orin, you want to speak a little to scab?
Well, I don't think I have anything different or more to add. I will say that at the university, where for a set of arcane regulations, we're no longer allowed to use lime sulfur, but I much preferred it to sulfur powder. I found it to be more effective. And there is some anecdotal evidence that lime sulfur, that is, can knock down collie moth counts. I think
powdered sulfur can.
Lime sulfur is more caustic in that regard, apparently. But one thing that's important in the world of organics is to do something in a prophylactic, preventative manner. And it could simply be selecting varieties that are less prone to scab. And some of them actually even taste okay. There's a program that started after the Second World War out of Purdue, Rutgers, and Illinois universities called the PRI program, and they have been working for all this time on breeding scab and mildew-resistant apple varieties, and they do the cutesy thing of usually putting the letters P, R, and I, Purdue, Rutgers, and Illinois, consecutively in the names of the variety, like Prima, Pristine, Williams Pride, and such. Now, these are great apples for the home grower. A lot of them are not going to cut it in terms of professional markets like that. But one I like is called Pristine, and I like it's a kind of wannabe Golden Delicious. And Golden Delicious, when fully true ripened, is a halfway decent apple. Not the apples they've made into a 365-day-a-year storage apple in the markets. Those are mush. But Pristine is a kind of a wannabe Golden Delicious, but it's usually ripens reliably about the third week in July. Another early one that they thought was going to just take over the Macintosh arena is Williams Pride. It's extremely early, again, late July, early August, and it's a darn good Mac. Mac. It's hard to get a big Mac. Well, you can go to Mickey D's and do that, of course, but so it's small, but that's kind of a Mac, and it's really great, and it is scab and mildew resistant, and it suffers about 100% pre-harvest drop, so that's a bit problematic. And Macintosh is notorious for pre-harvest drop, anyhow.
And Sky, do you have anything to add to this front?
No, just similar to Nicole. I mean, I don't love spraying for a host of reasons. I'm a mom of for a while I was pregnant, and then I had a newborn, and then I'm working part-time, and I don't want to get covered in the stuff or just, don't have the time to do it. And then philosophically, I feel like in certain cases, if you have a really intense disease load, it might be something that you do have to manage. And I know a lot of people do. And I also just prefer to, like Orin said, either through varietal selection or just kind of like let nature try to balance a little better and not just be spraying too much. I'm sort of like the opposite of Michael Phillips, I guess. So it's a mixture of philosophy and laziness, you could say, but seems to work out okay. And then, especially if you're pressing cider or eating apples at home, it doesn't matter if you have a lot of scab unless it becomes this huge problem. I personally don't mind, and our CSA members don't mind a little bit of, blemishes, so.
Well, on that front, thinking of like holistic non-spray methods, do you all want to speak to the role of mowing in kind of orchard maintenance and timely mowing? Like if you're going to mow your orchard, when are the best times to do it? And, what are the results? Like what does mowing do for your orchard, and how can it be an effective way to help control the fungal and pest management in your orchard?
Wow. Let's see. Well, mowing, for one thing, I really started mowing early in the spring is for some frost control. But generally it's not, every once in a while it is a problem. And we get little frost rings on pears and things like that. Gives you a couple of degrees protection over that if as compared to tall grass. So that I'm pretty sure of, and I tend to like my mowed orchard. So, but for other things, I don't know, when we do get throwing out the wood chips, the mower just keeps chopping them up a little finer, and that's not a problem. So prime time to mow. That's all I can say. The only reason I would do it early in the season is for frost control.
Sky, you want to tell them about the general regimen down at the farm and the orchard with cover crops and all that?
Sure. Yeah, we have a couple different, so we only have about 1.5 acres total of orchards, and they're in these small little blocks. So some of them, one orchard is where our smallest tractor can fit down the aisles, but it's mostly just like a walk. We call it the pedestrian orchard because we keep the semi-dwarfs short and to work only from the ground, no ladders. And we also just weed whack and occasionally take the BCS in there. So with that orchard, we will sow bell beans by hand, just in the mulch underneath the trees, and then come through with a machete or spade in the spring and chop them in by hand. For some of the other orchards that do have tractor alleys in the middle, we will mostly till the alleys between the trees, and sow bell beans or a mix of legumes and grasses in the alleys, and then mow those and incorporate them in the spring. As far as mowing underneath the the understory, like directly under the trees, because we do have planned and unplanned. Sometimes we do try to keep a more clean understory with just wood chips, but there's a ton of labor that goes into weeding. And we have some pretty intense perennial weeds, like that Orin said, like Bermuda grass has really been my nemesis in the last couple of years. So
Don't forget the bindweed.
oh, don't forget the bindweed. Bindweed, I don't know, for whatever reason, I'm like at peace with the bindweed, but the Bermuda grass just makes my blood boil. And Tim, I know you had some, and I think did you say you try to disc the bad areas, but what do you do for bindweed or for Bermuda grass?
Who, me?
Yeah. Do you have Bermuda grass?
It's a losing proposition.
Yeah.
And wood chips, they love wood chips. When I get a pile from the tree guys come and drop 4 or 5 piles, if I don't do something with them real soon, the Bermuda grass is growing up inside of it. It just loves it.
Yeah.
And I have Bermuda grass in every inch of my orchard. So we mow it, and we do weed eat around the trunks. Used to be warned about potential for rabbits and stuff and hanging around in tall grass around the trunks and maybe chewing on the bark. Hadn't really I've seen rabbits, but I've never seen that kind of damage that I know of. Mm-hmm. So we do weed eat as with the mowing when we have the time and the labor, as I was pointing out earlier, that we don't have the time to do it like I like to do it anymore.
Same. I tried to do some research sort of more towards your question, Brooks, about trying to learn how grasses work a little better. And, grasses and creatures that eat grasses kind of co-evolve together. So when they munch down grass, there is some shedding off of organic matter underground. So any kind of mowing or munching does provide some underground nutrient. And so I was wondering a couple of years ago, how can I maximize my mowing? I'm only going to mow a couple times a year. When should I do it? And really, even my pasture people, my friends who are grassland managers, it seems like it's a little bit of this mystery, the mystery under the earth of exactly what happens under there. It's hard to get an answer, but mostly it devolves to more of a practical timing. Like I like to mow before I put down irrigation or before I prune or before I'm thinning. You don't want waist high grasses. So that kind of thing is a little more pressing than necessarily biologically what might be ideal, because as we all know, even if you only have a garden, life is often not ideal. Right?
I'll pipe in a little bit more on we have irrigation, so we're moving pipe through the orchard every day, at least 5 days a week. And the grass, when the conditions are right, it gets so tall you can't work in it. So I do also mow as much as I can. Up until July, I can mow the whole orchard. Now I just can barely have time to hook up the mower and do a few hours where we're picking the most, because you just start slipping and tripping and it just slows you down. And we have a lot of foggy mornings, so it's tall, wet grass, and that stuff starts clinging and gets in your socks and all that stuff.
Yeah, Tim, I just saw that question, Nicole, about baby doll sheep, but I was curious, I'm very curious to hear that about the copper poisoning, because my parents are sheep farmers, and so I know that copper is toxic to sheep, and I often wondered if that was ever something that happened, because sheep could make good orchard creatures. Since they're not browsers, they're grazers. If you had tall enough trees and short enough sheep, it couldn't be a good marriage, but then you really have to be
your
careful.
Sheep will prune those trees up to out of their reach.
Yeah, exactly.
At some point, but you lose a lot of low branches and easy to pick fruit. And this was like 2.5 to 3 weeks after I sprayed copper.
Yeah.
And we had a couple inches of rain, and we still lost a sheep to that. And I know earlier on I thought that would be okay. And it stuff's pretty residual. Mm-hmm. Although, as Orin pointed out, it doesn't smell, it doesn't make you choke like sulfur does.
Well, when I worked at the apple farm at Tim's Apple Farm, we used to have sheep grazing through the orchard, and we used electric fence to move them through. So we would rotate them through the orchard, although it did make for we didn't have our sheepdogs fully trained, so we had to be human sheepdogs to get them back into the fence after we migrated it.
Over and over again. That's another reason we gave up on sheep.
Yeah,
They don't seem to care about the fence very much.
It was fun for me when I was 18 years old, but I don't think I'd find it as much fun now sprinting through the orchard chasing sheep.
Guarantee you wouldn't.
No. Well, I want to like zoom back out a little bit from, we got really deep into like orchard management and ascospores and fungal issues. Just if you're someone who has a couple old trees in your backyard, or you're a student who moves into a house here that has an heirloom tree in the backyard and it's totally overgrown, what should you do? What's like a 1 to 3 year plan for kind of approaching that tree? How should you, what can you do to take care of that tree and kind of bring it to fruition, so to speak? Orin's gonna start us off here.
Oh, good.
You could consider planting a new one. But here's the deal, or a portion thereof. A tree doesn't get out of control in 1 year. It takes a number of years. And this speaks to doing something in terms of pruning, shaping, and training each year. So a tree doesn't get out of control in 1 year, and you cannot bring it back in 1 year. So it's a process. If you have a tree that's unwieldy, as you're saying, I don't want to sound too woo here, but go out and vision the tree that you want, and then mark the limbs that you are going to keep. If you have a tree, a ramshackle tree like that, your best bet is to try to grow to a loose open center. Think of a cone shape with a nice circular opening at the top so the sun can get down into the base of the tree. You need a lot of sunlight to keep the tree fruitful. So all you're going to do is you're going to thin a select number of branches in each pruning session. And whatever the volume you want to take out of that tree, don't take more than about 20-25% out in any individual pruning session. You can prune in the summer and you can prune in the winter, because the only types of cuts you're going to make are what are called thinning cuts, where you take a branch out in its entirety. You're not going to cut it back a portion. That's called a heading cut, and it generally begets growth. You do not want to do that. So you start in, say, winter 1, and you start thinning branches. And you don't do any other type of pruning on that tree. You just walk away. No fine, detailed stuff like that. The mid-late summer, July and August, you can do a summer pruning session. The next winter, you do another one. The next summer, you do another one. So 25% times 4, 2 summer, 2 winter prunings gets you there. You can take a 20-foot tree, maybe make it a 12-foot tree, but you can't take a 20-foot tree and try to make a 6 to 8 foot tree out of it. So, and you want to just be moderate. But what you really want to do is not be in that situation. So if you have a tree, it speaks to learning how to train and prune it and do it on an annual basis. Dwarfing rootstocks are also an aid. They can help control tree size quite a bit.
Well put. That was the best description I could even imagine.
Let me just add one more thing here, which is we have quite a few workshops throughout the year at the UCSC Farm and Garden on trees, all aspects of growing trees. And I keep saying this so much, I got to shut up or else it becomes just simply idle chatter. But we should have a couple people volunteer their gnarly backyard trees, and we should have like a progressive pruning class around, the west side of town or something like that. And we could group, tackle, and tame these trees.
You can come to our orchard anytime. We have 60 and 80-year-old Red Delicious that we're just letting go.
Oh, Red Delicious, juicy sawdust, eh?
Get out your grafting knife.
Yep.
Does
Been
not
doing it
make
every
the
year.
best cider, that's for sure.
Yeah, wonderful answer, Orin. And I love the idea of a partnership with, looking and resurrecting some old trees, because they're so beautiful and to our hearts.
We
We're
should get
close-
a grant. We could be roving ambassadors for trees.
They're restoring old trees.
I
Yeah,
bet-
25%. And you got to be ruthless. You got to take that whole thing out. I had a woman, and she burst into tears after my third cut and with the chainsaw. And 4 years later, she thanked me. But oh boy,
Yeah, it's amazing what those apple trees can put up with. But as Orin said, you don't want to go too far. So it's definitely a razor's edge. We're closing in on our time here. So I just
oh darn.
I love where we're going with this. I like this idea of a roving tree resurrectionist. We can be the Dr. Frankenstein's, grafting and fixing trees around Santa Cruz. So if you have an old gnarly tree, please reach out. You have my email. We can put you in touch. I like this project, and I really want to give a round of applause for our wonderful panelists. So thank you so much. It's awesome. So
It was most excellent.
yeah, super fun. And hopefully, I like to say the phrase, in the post-pandemic world, we'll all get together under some apple trees and press some cider and spend some time together.
Yeah, raise a glass or two.
Yeah, definitely. And
Yeah.
much appreciated. And I would also note that, Nicole, her cider is available at the farmer's market on Wednesday in Santa Cruz. If you're there, and you should go and check it out. It's awesome. And you can see it in a bunch of local stores. And please check out our workshops that Orin mentioned. And if you're ever up in Philo, there's a very cool farm up there that Uncle Tim and Aunt Karen are roaming around the orchard. And thank you so much to Sky for coming through and sharing her wisdom with us. Orin's got something to say.
Yeah, here we are in pandemic times, of course. But I'm thinking of trying to put together a combination of Zoom talk Q&A, like this, I guess, and some on-site video to how to plant a tree, how to prune a tree, so we can have some semblance of our winter fruit tree workshops this year. So it'll probably be through the Friends of the Farm and Garden, which is a support group for CASFS, Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems, or as we just call it, or used to call it in the old days, the Farm and Garden.
I love it. Yeah, definitely keep tuned. We're producing a ton of great content through our remote internship, and we're going to make a lot of that available to the public. I see 1 or 2 interns here. We're really excited to have you here for our remote internship at CASFS, and thank you to all the friends and community members that came out and for participating. And yeah, really appreciate all of you.
I want to give a shout out to Brooks here. This guy is amazing. He's got this code kitchen out over at Cowell. He's taking students and he's training them in the fine art of how to make and put up food. And it's just a righteous thing that he's doing, providing basic need foods for students on campus too.
Hey, Brooksy.
Yeah, good job.
Thank you all so much. You have a great weekend and happy Harvest Festival.
Thank
All
you.
right, thanks, folks.
Bye.
Bye.